Recording. There you go. That's my second half. So my name is Dan Scanlon. I am a co-moderator for the WunderbarTogether discussion series. This is the second of 5. A very special thanks to the Auslandsgesellschaft in Dortmund, Germany, Matthias Mertes and Martina Plum for organizing this. And a great big thank you to WunderbarTogether for making funding for these 5 panel discussions possible. Just a reminder to native English speakers to pace yourself and to not talk too quickly because our German friends have agreed to conduct these discussions in English. So thank you very much. From the Buffalo side, we have Torrey Taussig. She is the research director for the Project on Europe and the Transatlantic Relationship and the American Secretaries of State Project at Harvard Kennedy School. And this is the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. You've also been a fellow in several ways. You've mentioned a few of them in our short discussion. We are still waiting on Mr. Ben Hodges. I'm not sure if he's gonna make it, but I will pass it on to Gerald to introduce your panelists today. Gerald? Gerald, unmute yourself.
Okay, so again, now, our old friend Horst Kläuser is with us, a colleague of mine in the WDR radio and television station in Cologne. And when I was a correspondent for the television in New York for many years, Horst was for many years correspondent for the radio in Washington, later on in Moscow, so that he also knows Mr. Putin personally. And because we thought he is a very good panelist for our theme today, transatlantic discussion on security and international cooperation and the perspectives of it. And naturally, we have 2 big challenges nowadays being confronted with. That the one is our relationship to Russia, as well as the relationship to China. And we have some other areas of crisis in the world which are often linked with our relationship to Russia and China. So in this a bit smaller panel, I will also encourage all other German and American participants in America and Germans who listen to it, and I see 16 already with us, that they can also use the chat function if they want to ask any questions or make some remarks, and we can then also in a second part of our discussion open it to the panel, which is not too big, and we can have a real German Stammtisch. And the German Stammtisch means a table of the regulars in a pub, which talk about actual themes, and it should be an open talk and discussion. That is our idea, not long speeches, but a discussion. Dan and I, we have thought that it is helpful to have in the beginning an overview of the state of security in the eyes of the United States and Germany. And maybe Torrey might start, how does the United States see now, under the Biden administration, the new transatlantic partnership and the security policy of the United States, which has luckily, I would say, dramatically changed during the last 6 months. Torrey, you want to start?
Yes, wonderful. And it's so nice to see you all on Zoom. I wish we could be in a real pub together, drinking real beer. Although it's a little early on the US side, although it's after 12 p.m., so I think I could have a beer. I hope some of you on the European side have a drink with you for the conversation. But just to start off, I wanted to say it's really a privilege to be here with you all. And truly my thoughts and prayers go out to all of you and your friends or relatives who may be affected by the flooding in Germany. We really stand with you in the United States, and we've been looking at the horrific photos and stories of what's been taking place in Germany and in Western Europe. And we stand with you on that. So my thoughts and prayers go with all of you today and recently. So just a 30,000 foot view of the security environment in the transatlantic community. To start off by saying, I think Gerald is absolutely right. The change in government, I think, has fundamentally changed the tone of the transatlantic relationship, moving from the Trump administration and a time in which I would say we were operating in a significant deficit of trust. We now have an administration that I think could be characterized as perhaps the most pro-transatlantic administration in recent history. President Biden himself is fundamentally pro-European. His background as vice president and on the Senate Committee for Foreign Relations includes a wide and very long-ranging background on European affairs and on standing strong on issues like Russian aggression in Europe. So, and then if we look at his cabinet, Secretary of State Blinken, Undersecretary of State Toria Nuland, Deputy Secretary Wendy Sherman, Jake Sullivan, even Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. I mean, these are pro-transatlanticists through and through. And so I think that's a positive shift from the previous administration. Two more points for me on the 30,000 foot view. One, going off my earlier point on the deficit of trust that I think we are starting this relationship, starting this administration in. I think the summits that we've seen recently from President Biden himself and from his cabinet members have done the right things. They've said the right things, and they've shown up in the right capitals to kind of rebuild the foundations of trust in this relationship. The fact that President Biden's first trip of his administration was to Europe, I think says something. I think that's important to show that he views the transatlantic relationship as the cornerstone of America's interests and goals in the world. I think the NATO summit and reaffirming America's commitment to Article 5 was important. I think holding the first US-EU leader summit since 2014 reprioritizes the US-EU relationship, particularly after a number of years when that's really been characterized by contention and a lack of trust. The bilateral relationships that President Biden held with European leaders on the sidelines of the G7 summit, also important. So I did want to start off by saying, I think these summits have, the leaders have said the right things, done the right things, and shown up in the right capital to begin to make progress moving forward. I will say, moving on to my second point, that despite the very pro-transatlantic, pro-European nature of this administration, this is an administration that is laser focused on China and the Indo-Pacific and in shifting resources, attention, and focus to that region. And in that sense, I do think to the extent to which we can enhance burden sharing and narratives and capabilities through European strategic autonomy, the better off this relationship will be. If you talk to people who are a bit more critical of this administration and their transatlantic approach than I am, they would say that, words are great. We're seeing people back at the table. That's awesome. But this is an administration that's focused on the Indo-Pacific and doesn't really have a clear strategic outlook for Europe. We can talk about that further. I think there is some validity to it. But again, I think at least 6-7 months into the administration, we're seeing the right things. So I'll close with that 30,000 foot overview. I think we're moving in the right direction on metrics like trust, cohesion, but this is an administration that's focused on China and the Indo-Pacific, and I think that the relationship will have to adapt as the administration moves forward with those broader goals. And with that, I see Ben has just joined.
Yes, Mr. Hodges, we were expecting to see you on the beach. A very warm welcome.
Well, that's not a picture you'd want to see as me on the beach, that's for sure. But no, I apologize. At 10 minutes before 12, my brother-in-law starts hollering, and I can see that my son and his son, who were in kayaks out by the sandbar, had both flipped, and the tide was starting to take them away. So I probably moved as fast as I moved in the last 15 years, running with a noodle to to get them. And well, you know, if you're a parent, what goes through your mind right then. And so anyway, yeah. They're back.
They're safe.
They're safe, and their mothers are smoking the shit out of them right now. And that's why I was happy to get in here to get away from that. So I apologize.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Hodges. You're a former infantry lieutenant. You were stationed in Karlstedt, Germany. You're a veteran commander in the 101st Airborne Division during Operation Iraqi Freedom. And you're currently the Pershing Chair in Strategic Studies at the Center for European Policy Analysis, correct?
That's correct.
Yes, a very warm welcome.
Well, I'm also a part-time driver for Torrey, for Dr. Taussig, or any other, take out her trash or anything else that she needs, you know.
A very warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I wonder, Ben, if you have heard already a part of what Torrey has said already.
Oh, I came in just at the last couple of minutes. I really apologize.
Then I would propose, that we continue with Horst Kläuser in Germany, and you have the chance then to respond on it again, so Great. That you come into the discussion. Horst, you have heard how Torrey has seen the transatlantic relations from the point of view in Washington or in the United States. And now, do we see it the same way from Germany?
Yeah, I think the remarkable difference is obviously the tone between the administration and Europe. But of course, there are some points which need to be addressed in the near future. I knew Biden as a senator, and he was always pro-Europe. He was approachable. I met him on several occasions on NATO summits. He was always approachable, and I at that time already felt that he was really close to Europe. But this doesn't help that he is, although he is the president, obviously, he has a divided Congress. And we probably have to address this Congress, which is not able to cross the aisles, as we have seen in many years in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And I think this is a way of trouble. And one of the big problems between Germany and the US is, I think, this new pipeline being built between Russia and Germany, the Nord Stream 2, which in my opinion wasn't necessary to build in the first place. And I think there would have been a big chance for the American administration, the Trump administration, to stop this project. But his way of dealing with things, his way of threatening German politicians, German companies, had the fatal flaw that people in Germany suddenly agreed to be building this pipeline because they didn't want Trump to interfere in German or European politics because of the tone, because of the way he saw Europe. And this was, in a way, it's a political tragedy. And there is a lot to be still healed in the future of our relationships. And then I think one of the words Henry Kissinger said, if I want to call Europe, I don't have a telephone number. And this, unfortunately, still is true. Although we seem to have a pretty competent European Commission in Brussels, and a lot of the people are doing great things. America, and so do other parts of the world, I think China as well and Russia as well, they don't want to deal with Europe as such. They want to deal with the countries. They want to deal with Berlin, they want to deal with, excuse me, with Paris, Rome, and London, and they don't see the European Commission and Brussels on the same level. And this still is a problem. And this derives, of course, that we don't have a single European foreign policy. And to everybody who watches European politics, it's clear that Europe doesn't speak with one voice. We have a lot of problems between, let's say, Berlin and Warsaw, Berlin and Budapest and some other countries. And this is easy for every other state around to see the divides which are still in Europe. So it's for the transatlantic relationship. I think there's a lot of homework to be done in the US, that they understand it would be great to deal with Europe as a European Union, and a lot to understand in European governments that we have to agree to a foreign policy which can be accepted by the US. I have no doubt that the transatlantic partnership will improve with this administrations, but both sides, and especially Germany for that matter, have to bring their share. And as there is a lot of the European countries are within NATO, and so are the US, of course. And I think there's a lot to be developed within this relationship between NATO, EU, and the US.
I think we turn now to Ben Hodges in Florida, and I think we does see it similar like Horst in Germany.
Thank you. Now I finally caught my breath, so I can. So I really feel bad that I didn't hear all of what Torrey had to say, because I have been on virtual events with her before, and it's always worth listening to. For probably 3 points come to mind. And Horst, I look forward to meeting you in person one day. I agreed with everything you said, but I disagree with the stuff you didn't say. In other words, not one time did I hear you say Berlin has got to do more. I mean, you did what I hear from most of my German friends. I live in Frankfurt, by the way. And by the way, the past administration, absolutely, completely the wrong approach to how to deal with not only Germany, but all of our other European allies. So I'm not excusing any of that. It was completely wrong. I could feel it around me that Germans, even if they completely agreed with 2%, I was like, no way would any German politician publicly come out for it, because they didn't want to be seen as giving in to that approach. So I completely understood that. But what I never heard you say was, you know, the chancellor, she has got to provide leadership. Germany has got to provide leadership. Germany has a role to play in this relationship as well. It didn't go sour in just 4 years or 3 years. I mean,
I agree.
I was showed up to be the commander of U.S. Army Europe, headquartered in Wiesbaden in 2014. 2 years after 6 years of President Obama, who I know has huge personal popularity in Germany, and it was already in a bad way. So I think Germany has got to Germans have to figure out what is your strategic role in the world. And I think there's too much using history as an excuse. For the first time in history, Germany is surrounded only by friends. I mean, not perfect friendships, but by friends. You're under threat on no flank for the first time in history. And it's impossible for most Americans to understand things like Nord Stream 2. And this, every country, including my own, is guilty of hypocrisy at times, but there is a significant amount of hypocrisy coming from Berlin when it comes to Nord Stream 2 and all the other things, or making huge deals with China and then talk about human rights.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Okay.
And I totally agree.
Okay.
There is a certain pacifist mood in all Germany. And now, within the last few days, we see how good it is to have a Bundeswehr because they help in the flooded areas. But other than that, when there are some international missions, be it in the framework of the UN or NATO or whatever, we send sanitary troops. We might send some overflight jets to bring some aerial photos. You know better than me, but there is always a big hesitance to send troops on the ground or to send tanks. We always think, oh, no, 75 years ago, we were a very aggressive part of the world. We caused 2 world wars, and we will never be in a war. But the freedom we enjoy in Germany, and I'm one of the in a generation which was brought up with a lot of thanks towards the United States. And that the democracy we are enjoying in Germany right now was guaranteed by the United States. And in the Cold War, the United States always stood on our side. And now it's the responsibility of one of the strongest economic nations in the world to actually, exactly what you said, to play its role. And this means not only in the center of Europe, where we are with by the way, our neighbors, we have nine borders with friendly neighbors. No other country in Europe has so many borders, and that's lucky in our history. You're perfectly right, but we have to take responsibility that this will stay as it is.
Now, I think it's important that the Bundeswehr gets credit for what it is doing. I mean, for most of the 20 years in Afghanistan, Germany was the 3rd largest troop contributing nation in the north of Afghanistan. So thousands of soldiers, combat soldiers, served in Afghanistan. And of course, when the alliance in 2014 created the Warsaw Summit in 2016, made the decision to deploy the enhanced forward presence battle groups, Germany immediately said, we will be the framework nation for the enhanced forward presence battle group in Lithuania. And I love that because this was, stepping forward, accepting a leadership role with tanks, everything. And that demonstrated the power of German example, because then everybody else in Europe said, well, hell, Germany's doing it, now we have to do it. And that put so much pressure on other European nations to join this NATO and henceforward presence battle group. So I think, and honestly, I would not want Germany to do things, major strategic things, out of a sense of obligation to the United States. What I would want is our German allies, out of a sense of collective security, to take that stand. My second point, and I don't want to use up more than my share of time here, and I welcome being challenged on any of this. My second major point is that I believe that Berlin is the only capital that can really influence Kremlin behavior. Not the United States, not Paris, not Brussels, only Berlin. And this has been a major disappointment so far, that since the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, other than some sanctions by the EU, which fortunately have been kept in place thanks probably largely to Germany, those sanctions have had zero influence on Kremlin behavior. The sanctions have slowed down military modernization, but the Kremlin has not improved their behavior since they've invaded in 2014. Yesterday was 1 year of a ceasefire signed by Ukraine, Russia, and the OSCE. And in that 1 year, 45 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed and over 160 have been wounded during a ceasefire. And so you see that happening, and at the same time, we're going to have a big ribbon cutting ceremony when Nord Stream 2 is completed. You can see why the Kremlin feels zero pressure from Berlin. And then finally, my third point is I do believe, and I did hear Torrey mentioning this, I completely agree that the new US administration and frankly, the whole Congress by and large is a strong believer in transatlantic relationship. The president has removed all doubt about American commitment to NATO. The Congress continues to support these things. The actual number of troops living in Germany, not rotational, but living in Germany, increased during the Trump administration and is continuing in the Biden administration. So when getting past the rhetoric, it's for our contribution to NATO, but for our own strategic purposes, the air bases, the hospital, the training area, the logistics hubs that we have in Germany, but also in Turkey and in Greece and in Italy and in Spain are essential for our strategic purposes. And so we need that, especially with such a small, in terms of numbers of troops.
Has anybody an idea which concrete measures can be taken together with a powerful pressure towards Russia, or later on maybe also we talk about China? Is there any chance really to force Putin to give up a certain behavior, like in Ukraine, like in Syria, like in human rights, Navalny, etc., and things like that? Maybe you want to start, Torrey, now?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I agree with both Ben and Horst that the current transatlantic policies toward Russia that are primarily sanctions-based are not doing much of anything to change Putin's actual behavior. And I think, just to go back to the Nord Stream 2 point, this is an issue where Germany, of course, is not led. It's taking policies that are not in Europe nor Ukraine's energy security interests. I don't think it's in Germany's long-term energy security interests either. But that aside, and trying to think of constructive policies and ways to move forward, I think within NATO, in terms of military presence on the eastern flank, we've seen rotating battalions on the quote unquote Eastern Front that there has been some discussion about making permanent. I think that's one, and I'm sure Ben has more to add on that, the military front, but I think that's one important force posture deterrence mechanisms that NATO can take. But when it comes to changing Putin's actual calculus, I think this comes down to how Putin operates within Russia, and what the power centers are within Russia. I mean, this is a kleptocratic network of pretty corrupt, very wealthy individuals that are trying to stay wealthy and secure at all costs. And that includes Putin himself. Clearly, the sanctions have not done a lot to change Putin's own personal wealth or those close around him. But I'm kind of heartened in the long term to see how America's focus on anti-corruption, anti-kleptocratic, and similarly Europe's anti-counter money laundering efforts could in the longer term start to cut down on dark money and financial flows throughout Europe. Will that change Putin's calculus tomorrow? No, but I think the more we focus on Putin and also kind of the Russian leading elite's ability to amass their wealth in Europe, the better. And that means looking at Russian influence, not just in terms of its military modernization or even its pipelines, but also in its kind of, again, corrupt, kleptocratic networks of influence around Europe. So I admire the Biden administration's focus on counter-corruption, and I think there is room for progress between the US and European countries on this front. Again, I think that's a long-term solution that can start to cut down on some of this ill-gotten wealth and power in Russia.
Maybe, Horst, you have lived in Moscow for quite a while and have also seen Putin acting. Do you believe that Putin is, but I say it in a different way. I say it as a provocation. I think Putin is not anymore an authoritarian president, but he is already a dictator without disregard of human rights. He wants only to stay or to defend his political power and influence forever, and to protect and support his political friends and kleptomanic oligarchy.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And we are back to a situation in which the certain services within the Putin administration, the FSB or the military, services, they actually empower Putin. He is part of that. His roots are in the secret service of Russia. And I think Torrey is totally right. We put the wrong, meaning the West, we put the wrong persons under sanctions because most of them are laughing about it. Just to make a personal example, whenever I left Russia in the last years, and normally it was on a Friday to be at home on the weekend, I flew out from Vnukovo Airport, which is one of the 3 major airports of Moscow. And even the airline planes had to wait in line until 20, sometimes 30 private jets were leaving for European destinations. They were going to Nizza or Rome or I don't know, to Paris or some cities in Switzerland. Those are the oligarchs who succeeded in bringing billions and billions of dollars or euros, which they cannot spend in Russia, to European countries, buying castles, buying hotels, sending their kids to European schools and universities. They all have flats in London, bringing up the prices for Londoners to live there. And this is the elite, which is left alone under Putin as long as they support his regime. And actually, Europe and maybe the US as well had to target those people, because if Putin loses this base, which leaves him doing everything, I think then his power might crumble within a few years. The Russian people, in a way, is different from many other peoples waiting for democracy. Most of them never encountered real democracy. And when it happened in the 90s under Boris Yeltsin, democracy was a synonym for kleptocracy, as you said, for people getting richer and richer. And it was a new way of nomenclatura, which was great under the Soviet rulers. And now it's money, it's their influence, and actually the wealth or the well-being of the Russian population hasn't increased much under Putin and under Russia being a state and not the Soviet Union. And this is a major big problem. Sometimes there are a little social unrest because older people lose their health care insurance or whatever. But by and large, the Russian population, as soon as you leave Moscow for 60 kilometers, you see the same poverty, even worse poverty than they had in the Soviet Union. They has as the biggest gas producer in the world, they have no gas. They have no flushing toilets. And this is a shame for such a great country, which, by the way, I deeply love because part of my family come from there, still live in St. Petersburg. And it's just a shame that this great nation with one of the biggest resources in the world has an economy comparable that of Italy, or even less, maybe like the Netherlands.
Italy, better off. Okay. I would, in between, I would just encourage all the other participants. I see we have 18 altogether at the time being now. If they have some questions or remarks, please use the chat function or give us a hand sign or something like that, that you can also put some questions to our panelists. So coming back to Putin and how can we put more pressure on Russia? And how do we target the right persons or the right branches of fields to force the administration in Kremlin to behave better generally? I think this will be very, very difficult. Mrs. Merkel, I take her point of view now, as a chancellor, has always expressed the hope that she can talk to Putin. She took sometimes the phone and talked to him. She spoke Russian, of course, too, and she had the feeling to have a level of understanding, but she was badly, badly disappointed times. And again, she didn't really reach him. So we can't talk to him. We can't force him by certain sanctions. What else can we do? Cut off all our trade relations, cut off all our gas import, or what else? And now, much more difficult, China. The trade relations between Europe, but also United States and China are very close. I think if China would withdraw all the credits from the United States, the US are bankrupt almost. So we have little possibilities.
May I ask a question to Ben? Ben, you have your deep roots in the military, and Russia always tries to convince its own population and the world around him that Europe and the US are planning an attack on Russia. And that's why they need all their defense, new ballistic missiles and whatever they have. Did you, in your military career, see at any point that Russia would vice versa dare to attack Europe or any countries on the European border?
Every day. I was in northern Germany in Graustadt from March of 1981 until February of 1984. And we practiced over and over and over and over a no-notice rollout to a position somewhere because of a surprise attack, along with the Bundeswehr, which had 12 divisions at that time. And we all, were prepared for that. Not once in those 3 years or in the, 37 years since then, did I ever hear practice do anything that was the opposite, where we were practicing to do that. I mean, the safest part of Russia's border is, of course, the part that goes from Norway all the way around to Georgia. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the safest part of their border. Yet where do they have the vast majority of their troops? In the Western and Southern military districts. And the biggest fleets, of course, the Black Sea Fleet, and then their Northern Fleet. So I think the president of the Russian Federation needs, because of the things that you outlined so vividly and accurately of conditions inside Russia, which I agree is a great country, and their people have suffered more than most of the oppressed peoples around their periphery. He needs to keep to justify what he does. So you need an external threat. There are in Germany today about 30,000 US Army, of 30,000, of which most are logistics, communications, headquarters, intelligence, military police, et cetera, et cetera. Only one regiment there in Vilseck in the Oberpfalz of what you would call a combat unit. That's it. I mean, all the American troops in Germany could not fill up the wonderful stadium in Frankfurt where Eintracht plays football. Okay. And I mean, that's the size of what we have there. And so, and the professionals inside the Kremlin and the Russian defense, I mean, they know what's there. So this threat from the United States is a complete fairy tale, a narrative that they need for internal consumptions. Unfortunately, and I think this goes to the original question about what are concrete steps that we could take. And I agree with you, Horst, that absolutely step one should be targeting those oligarchs. I mean, it doesn't take the BND and the FBI all their resources to figure out where the money is. I mean, we can do that. But I think the reason we're reluctant is because we're going to be embarrassed when we see our own complicity in some of these transactions. Same as why we're not able to shut off all the money to terrorist organizations, because it's moving through banking systems in some of our allies. Now, to China, I'll just make an introductory point here. We, for I think decades, going all the way back to President Nixon, every administration has looked at China as, okay, it's dangerous, but the world's largest market, and American consumers, like European consumers, like to be able to buy cheaper goods. And so we have allowed ourselves to become hooked on so many things that create a dependency, and including debt, that now it does hamstring us. And so I think in this case, the administration is correct to want to work with our partners in the European Union, as well as our allies within NATO and in the Indo-Pacific region, to only by combining economic effort and diplomatic effort can we actually change the direction that things are going now. Otherwise, I think we're going to be in a kinetic conflict with China within the next 5 years.
Yeah, it was for me, it was an alarm clock in the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, when we had to learn that all the medical equipment and masks and things like that were all produced only in China. And we couldn't get any masks because China used them for themselves and didn't export them anymore. To see this kind of dependency you just have mentioned, Ben, we can't really get out anymore of this kind of trade relationship. But how can we talk to the Chinese? How can we tell them that they have, they insist in freedom of trade and investment for themselves in America, Huawei or other company or other investments, but they don't allow us, the West, I mean, to do it freely in the same way in China.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in on the trade and economic front with China. I think, of course, trade and economic relations with China are top of mind for Germany and for Chancellor Merkel in particular, just given the weight of the economic relationship and also the dependencies that Germany has, its exports, its automobiles has on the China market. And I think that certainly factored into Merkel's thinking when it came to pushing the comprehensive agreement on investment over the finish line right on the eve of the Biden administration. I think that is probably the economic relationship factored into the German government's decision not to outrightly ban Huawei from Germany's 5G networks. I mentioned those two examples, the investment agreement and 5G, because they're probably two of the more controversial issues that are viewed pretty negatively in the United States in terms of Germany's approach toward China. That being said, I think if you look at the European level, we have seen a number of instances in which Europe has kind of woken up to the challenges presented by China. And to be fair, Germany has as well. Something that was looked at as a big turning point in Washington was the European Union's white paper on China that was drafted in 2019, which called out China as everything from a partner, a competitor, to a rival, which was a significant shift in the way that Europe viewed its relations with Beijing. I also think that we've seen important steps at the EU level in terms of regulating Chinese companies' access to the European market, and in ensuring that Chinese companies and any non-European Union companies are not able to make these leveraged buyouts of EU companies at the expense of European industry and European companies. So I think investment screening has gotten stronger. Just a general understanding of China's reach into Europe has gotten stronger. So I think those are a few positive metrics to look at in terms of Europe's approach toward China. Looking ahead, just to make a few points on where I think we as a transatlantic relationship should focus on China, I think there's a few things we can do. I should caveat this first by saying that I don't think we're going to see NATO anytime soon shift its primary strategic theater to the Indo-Pacific. I think Ben would completely agree with that. Despite the fact that we've seen strategies come out of the EU, France, the UK, Germany with new Indo-Pacific strategies, I think the Indo-Pacific will remain a strategic theater for the United States in ways that it never will for Europe. That's the caveat. I do think Europe needs to focus on what a conflict in the Indo-Pacific could look like very tangibly for European interests. Europe has a lot at stake in the stability and open access of the Indo-Pacific, even if it is not militarily engaged or present there. And so I think more strategic thinking needs to go into what some sort of confrontation in the Indo-Pacific could mean for Europe and what follow-up steps would be. Second, I think that the transatlantic relationship needs to look a bit more concretely at the growing partnership and coordination between Russia and China. Will these two countries ever have the level of strategic cohesion that we have in the West? Absolutely not, I don't think, at least in the near term. But are we seeing enhanced military coordination, economic partnerships, and political trust between Presidents Putin and Xi? Yes. And I know this is a relationship that, at least in the US and in the Biden administration, they're paying a lot of attention to. What does this relationship mean for Europe? This may seem like doomsday 2055 or whatever, but I do think that we in the West need to think about how Russia might try to take advantage of distraction in the West if there's some sort of confrontation over Taiwan. If Beijing seeks to destabilize Taiwan beyond the ways that it is now, and there is some sort of confrontation in the Indo-Pacific, as far as
we have seen it in Hong Kong. We have seen it in Hong Kong.
Seen it in Hong Kong.
All paralyzed there, and they have nothing done.
Right. And what would that, if there were some sort of distraction in the Indo-Pacific, could Putin act in Eastern Europe? I don't know. But I think that that's something we need to be gaming out a bit more. Final point, I do think and we've seen, I think, a good amount of progress on this to date. We need to be better and more consistent about speaking with a collective voice on human rights. Gerald, you mentioned Hong Kong. We did see some coordinated efforts from the UK, Europe, the United States following Beijing's encroachment and imposition of a new national security law in Hong Kong. We need to see more of that. We need to see more coordinated actions, sanctions, tactics, in places like Xinjiang, where the CCP is carrying out massive human rights atrocities. This is where we have a collective voice and capacity to act, not just between the US and Europe, but our Indo-Pacific partners as well. And then we can talk, I know we only have a few minutes left. I think technology is going to be a massive area of competition. It already is between the US, Europe, and China. And we need to be investing far more capabilities, resources, and political will into ensuring that the US, Europe, and democratic countries kind of win the 21st century of technological innovations at a time where Beijing is quickly approaching our capabilities and surpassing them. And I know that that's of critical importance in Berlin as well.
Yeah, but I know also that the Chinese are very tricky, because I have experienced myself here in Italy when we had the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we had the horrible pictures of Bergamo in front of us, where people died like flies. And the first planes landed in Milano to bring medical equipment, masks, and Atemgeräte, yeah. ventilators to Italy. That was a Chinese plane, and everybody applauded in this situation here in Italy, the Chinese friends. This is very tricky what they do. Huh?
Yeah, the Russians, by the way, did the same with old military equipment, which was unusable. But this obviously was a PR stunt. But I think what Torrey said in her last sentence is exactly one of the challenges we face in Europe and in the United States, because we actually were in a way, we were actually invited in China to invest in big car companies, in computer manufacturing and all that. Or actually we had a magnetic ride train perfectly developed in Germany, which was not loved at that time, so it never materialized. Then they bought it between Shanghai and Shanghai Airport, made a perfect copy, developed it further, and now the fastest magnetic train rides drive in China. So we see the same Chinese companies buying strategic, important companies in Germany with a lot of technical know-how, even machinery which can be used to produce military products. And in ways of software development or artificial intelligence, we will see, in my opinion, within the next few years, China running away, being much better. And actually, when we see how they control the population by means of cameras everywhere, by means of tracing people in Xinjiang, in Hong Kong, and they use artificial intelligence and get an experience which is way ahead of what we have in Europe and the US. And we don't need ballistic missiles for that, but they are in a way so big and so forceful, and they own so much money to spend that they even can buy technical knowledge from everywhere, even human resources from anywhere. I think there will not be a strategic alliance between Beijing and Moscow, because Beijing doesn't see China as being on the same level. For, I don't know who said it once, for China, Moscow is nothing but a big gas station. Maybe it's a little bit overestimated or underestimated, I don't know. But I see that the real challenge is for the United States and Europe to rebuild their resources of knowledge, of technical experience, of being able to make their own communication systems, their own computer development, and not to transfer all the knowledge to China, which is not friendly.
So coming close to an end, then I think we have to come closely to an end. I understand that the best way to create a new stability, transatlantic stability, is to work closer together and to be more independent, self-reliant, without having these kind of dependency from China, from Russia concerning gas, or for instance, and to rely more on our cooperation and our strength. Is that correct? Ben, would you agree?
I would agree with all that you said, but at the same time, of course, we all want that Chinese market, and we all want access to the endless amount of natural resources that Russia has. And all of us will indirectly benefit in the next 20 years as the northern trade route becomes more and more viable coming over the Arctic. So it's in our strategic interest to have what President Biden called reliable, stable, predictable sort of relationships. But we'll never get there if all I hear from Berlin is, oh, we must continue the dialogue. That's all I hear from Berlin. The dialogue has never stopped. There's endless dialogue and endless venues for doing it, but they laugh because we're not willing to, we, the collectively, are not willing to hold them accountable. And I like that Torrey was talking about competition earlier. This is a great power competition. And I believe that great power competition actually prevents great power conflict when you compete, not just in military, but in diplomatic and information and in economic space. When you're competing, you're conveying that this is important and we're going to put resources on it. I would rather the United States, instead of beating our German and British allies over the head about Huawei, surely the United States and Ericsson and Nokia together can come up with a better 5G that's reasonable. So the economic competition, competing in the Black Sea region. You know, we have Russian peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh, and then they still occupy 20% of Georgia because we never conveyed that this was important. So that's why I think the competition is important. Now, that does mean you have to have some kind of military capability to back it up, to ensure freedom of navigation, for example, whether we're talking about the Black Sea, the Arctic, or South China Sea, or Straits of Taiwan. But I think, you know, the Chinese saw, after they smashed those protesters in Hong Kong, we didn't do anything, zero. I mean, not even UK, zip. And so and that's an invitation to conflict.
I agree. I think we have to revive what they call the West, all the values of the West, and we have to revive as well in Europe, and not only the European Union. There are other states which have to be in that, and the US, and we have maybe more than partners develop where we came from. We have to develop our universities. We have to develop our productional possibilities we had. And when I go through an American shop these days, be it Walmart or something else, or I'm more often in Canada, 50% of all the things you buy are from China. This is just, we have to take back the we have to take back the production of things we developed and make us again independent from cheap labor in China and wherever.
Yes, but our political leaders have got to tell the population, okay, everybody, your cell phone's going to go up another $100 or €100.
Yeah.
Because, and here's why. And have the courage to explain that to people. And usually if leaders explain things and it makes sense, it's like, God dang it, okay. But I think that would require a fairly large degree of, look at the difficulty we're having in the US, just convincing people for the public good to get vaccinated or to wear a mask. So that requires really courageous political leadership. Excuse me for interrupting.
Dan, I don't know how long we can discuss still, and if we have to come to an end, because Zoom time is limited as far as I know.
We have 10 more minutes, so it's always a pleasure to hear everybody's discussion. So is there anybody who would like to maybe ask a question? Or mention something else?
I personally had hoped we have more constructive ideas what to do together. And in the end, it was a bit frustrating to see how the development might end up in the next 20 years, and we get more and more conflicts probably instead of solving them. So far, I'm grateful, or I would be grateful for some constructive last strategies, words, or hopes, because then I can sleep better tonight.
Yeah.
You know,
I have a question. Sorry, if sanctions are not the right way to deal with Russia and to try to change Putin's behavior, what is the right way, or is at least a better way?
I said we have to leave the sanction in place, but we have to enlarge it to the real powerful oligarchs, which are the base of Putin's power so far, because they would not like to lose their visa rights for Europe, for instance, because they have all their chalets and all their holiday homes in Spain, in the Côte d'Azur, and so on, and they cannot go with their big yachts to Mallorca and all those places. And as soon as this happens, if they cannot continue their, I would call it obscene lifestyle, they will pressure Putin. And this will happen. The power of the people on the street is, although I really adore them, it's too small in Russia. Most of the oppositions, either their parties are forbidden or the candidates cannot compete in any elections. and the people are frightened. Even a one-man protest on the street is now reason enough to incarcerate somebody. This is just unbelievable. So we cannot hope that the Russian people stands up and throws out Putin from the Kremlin. This will not happen so far. But when the pressure comes from within the system, then something will change.
So to punish people who really, have power and not just punish the whole population. No?
And on the flip side of the coin, when we talk about the Russian population, as the US and Europe and the UK seek to cut off access to financial interests, assets of Russian oligarchs and those close to Putin in the West, I think we also need to be making very concrete efforts, more than we are now, to strengthen ties at the civil society level and in between Russian society, European society, and Americans. And that has to do a lot with engaging young Russians. This is not meant to sound Pollyannish, but I think that the US and Europe in particular could be doing a lot more to improve educational ties, lowering visa restrictions for young Russians who want to come and study in Europe and stay in Europe. The only people that are going to change Russia are the Russians. There is, as Horst mentioned, important upward pressure from within the system that needs to affect Putin's calculus and will affect Putin's future and whoever his successor might be. But there's also building connections and engagement with the Russian people that over time, again, is irreplaceable in strengthening European-Russian ties. And final point.
Let me just underline this. After World War II, the Fulbright Commission, or you had all different kinds of exchange between young Germans and the US. They came over to the US, were invited, living in American families, came back to Germany as Democrats. So I'm advocating for many, many years already that we drop the visa regulations for young Russians to come to Europe. Let them see what freedom means with their own eyes. The big problem, though, is there is a German-Russian youth exchange. It was just now or a few weeks ago declared a, what is the technical term, a foreign agent, meaning they cannot accept money from abroad, which is necessary, for instance, from the German state. So there is no exchange. It was so wonderful after World War II, and we had to do the same with Russia and Europe, and it's just not happening.
I think another thing, constructive policy, especially with Ukraine, is to really enhance the political will and investment in Washington and in European capitals for Ukrainian political and economic reforms and strengthening Ukraine's resilience in the face of Russian aggression. I think this is another reason why Nord Stream 2 is so frustrating in Washington, because it hurts Ukraine's own domestic resiliency and its ability to access transit fees, and has become more leverage and under the influence of Russian gas exports. So I think there are steps that we can be taking to enhance Ukraine's reform efforts and domestic resiliency. Nord Stream 2 does not help that. But I think, for example, we just saw State Councilor Derek Chollet from the State Department go over to Ukraine to enhance America's commitment to Ukraine's domestic reform efforts. But that's a key piece of the puzzle.
Should we allow Ukraine to become a member of NATO?
It's an issue that's been debated for a long time. I think NATO's open door policy should stay in place. But I don't think Ukraine is in a position now, given its domestic political situation, to enter into NATO.
And Georgia should already be a member. With Ukraine, I think the United States, we have got to fix our bilateral relationship with Ukraine, make it much stronger, and work with Germany and France and the UK to help bring about the necessary, I don't want to just keep saying reforms, but certain things like more RADA oversight of the Ministry of Defense, for example. To me, that would be a very powerful and helpful measure that would change the dynamic there, bring in more transparency, reduce the potential for corruption, and also it helped make sure that Ukrainian armed forces had best possible capabilities. But I think that we should continue the idea or the belief that Ukraine actually can be a member of the alliance, and that the Kremlin should not be allowed to veto, in effect, who joins and who doesn't. I mean, the real question is, why is it that every former Soviet republic and every former Warsaw country can run into NATO at the first possible opportunity? Yeah. What is it that they know about what goes on in the Kremlin that they are so determined to get away from? That should be the narrative, not NATO is creeping eastward, which is a totally false narrative.
Yeah, I totally agree, Ben. And I was in Kiev in December 2004 for the Orange Revolution, and I was there in 2013, 2014, and 2015. I've rarely encountered more peaceful demonstration and protests in such a surrounding, of course, not excluding the terrible shootings and murderers in February 2014, in the middle, in the heart of Kiev, which I encountered, and it was just terrible. And I've never seen demonstration where they waved so many yellow star, blue flags, the European flags, than in an Eastern country. I've never seen so many European flags in Bonn, not in Berlin, not in Brussels, nowhere. So they are hungry. They want to join the Western values, the freedom. And we have to support what I said about Russian youth. It's the same, of course, with Ukrainian youth. They should come over and see for themselves. But I had the impression that they would rather join the European Union than NATO. But this is something I cannot decide for myself.
So we have one question, it's still Dan. We got one question from Sven, and that should be the last question, and then we have to come to an end. Sven has written in the chat, I don't doubt the need to contain Russian and Chinese expansionism, but how do you balance this imperative with the need for cooperation on global issues such as global warming? So we are in a world where we have to talk all together with each other.
We need another 2 hours.
Yes, this is actually the next session coming up on August, I believe, the 26th. So this is a very good question, maybe to carry over also. But is there any input about this question?
Well, I'll just say briefly, I think it's helpful that it is there is a huge amount of domestic pressure in China for Beijing and the Communist Party to address climate change. So even though the United States and China don't see eye to eye on a range of issues, climate change is one where there is a shared interest, where I think we'll continue to see leaders that don't agree whatsoever, like Biden, Putin, and Xi, still come to the table to talk. And a key example of this was Biden's climate summit held back in April of this year. It was virtual, but you had Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi and all world leaders on the line. And again, this is a key constituency issue for the Communist Party, if we could ever call that one. And it's going to be important for China to address domestically as its own base of power as well.
So we go in depth later on in August. Then our next panel in August will focus also on climate change and global common issues.
Yes.
So, Mr. Colleague in Iowa now, in the cornfield. It's up to you to come to an end.
Yeah, no, still in Buffalo for a few more days, but we'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. And we hope that you can join us next month for number 3 of 5 from WunderbarTogether. Any other comment, Gerald?
No, I can only say thank you to all of you. We had about 19 participants for this kind of Stammtisch, which is normally a regular table in a pub in Germany where 10, 12 people sit and talk wildly together or with each other or against each other. I've had, I think, an interesting discussion without any concrete results, which I couldn't expect, because the world is too complicated to have easy answers for them, except if you are a dictator, then you have always easy answers. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
But